the cry of the shofar is the tears of Sarah. The cry of the ram's horn is the tears of Sarah, says the Midrash. The Midrash is the early rabbinic commentaries on the Torah. And this particular Midrash is written this week to help us bridge this gap in the story between the end of last week's Torah portion and the beginning of this week. And the story goes that an evil, lying presence came to announce to Sarah that her husband Abraham had taken her son Isaac and slaughtered him on the altar he had built atop Mount Moriah. Sarah is devastated. It's like the floor of her whole life suddenly dropped. And the Midrash tells us Sarah began to cry and moan the sounds of three wails that are the three blasts of the shofar. The pain was so unbearable, the Midrash continues, that her soul burst forth from her and she died. And that's the way the Midrash closes the gap and explains why the sudden death of Sarah in the first verse of this week's Torah portion. The tears of Sarah are our tears. How can we not weep when members of our people are being slaughtered once again because of this hatred that never dies? How can we not moan when, as an echo from our darkest past, the shouts of the murderer, where all Jews must die right before the machine gun went off? How can we not be scared when this illusion of security that we have had in this land as Jews for so many generations suddenly comes crashing down in front of our very eyes? How can we not draw a direct line between what happened last Shabbat in Pittsburgh and what happened just two short few years ago in Charleston? And realize in that moment that we are not white. We are not white if we need to hire armed guards to protect our houses of worship. We are not white if we fear walking down the streets with a yarmulke, a kippah on our heads, that we might be confronted with lewd comments or even worse. We are not white if we are concerned that our cars would be broken into if we put a bumper sticker that has the word Jewish Synagogue Israel on it. We are not white when our buildings, our institutions are defaced with anti-Semitic graffitis, when our cemeteries are violated. We are not white when our holidays are not ever included in the calendars of our kids' schools. Where it seems to be okay for the music director of that school to have our children sing Away in the Manger or Holy Night for the winter recital. Or when your kids come back from school every other week, sharing with you yet another anti-Semitic joke that he heard in the cafeteria or on the playground. Or that another kid had his locker tagged with a swastika. This week of Shiva, we are still sitting Shiva. This week of Shiva, we cry. We cry and we moan. And we shed mournful tears. But it all becomes too much. Too much when even the shooting of 11 of our people becomes almost overshadowed by the other horrors of the week. The pipe bombs that were mailed to kill. 2 African American citizens shot dead in the middle of the day by yet another racist white supremacist. Another kid dead at a school shooting. And that's just the top few of this last week's list. But the sounds of the shofar are not just the tears hour of Sarah. The sounds of the shofar are also the sounds that are there to wake us up. The piercing sound that are there to shake us out of our complacency, out of our numbness. We need to take a stand now to protect still this pluralistic society that we cherish and want to see grow and flourish and blossom. We need to speak up now against all forms of racism. Anywhere we hear it, anywhere we see it, online, offline, anywhere you go, if you hear it, call it out. We need to speak up against homophobia, against sexism, against anti-Semitism, to protect the stranger, the refugee, the voiceless, the ignored, the discarded, the forgotten. We need to denounce. We need to denounce forcefully the propagation of anti-Semitic lies from our president, who blames us, the Jews, for the rise in anti-Semitic crimes around the nation, saying that we are doing it to ourselves in order to make him look bad. Who accuses the Jew under the name, in the guise of George Soros, for funding the protests outside of the hearing of Brett Kavanaugh, blaming the Jew. We know what he says when he says George Soros. He's pointing the finger at each of us. And these lies that become huge stories, that are taken and transformed into conspiracy theories that were all over the internet this week, the same lies that have blamed the Jew again, George Soros, for paying those immigrant caravan coming to our borders. And when the president was asked on Wednesday, the same day that he released the most racist campaign ad ever released by a modern president, when he was asked about this story, he said, and I quote, "I wouldn't be surprised if it was true." These words are dangerous. These words we've seen this week chill. And we have to denounce them loudly, forcefully. Today, when we be done with sitting Shiva, we'll gather together to work together to preserve and save this democracy of ours, this pluralistic society of ours. And we have to be very careful. We have to be very careful because there are forces that are dropping into our inboxes, into our Facebook pages, into whatever media we're on, that are edging us towards more anger and more hatred, that are pushing us as well towards violence. And we have to be extremely careful, because if we want to save this pluralistic society of ours, we can't let those voices manipulate us into widening the gap, the chasm that has divided our nation, that has pit us dangerously now against each other. I even read an article this week of some already voicing the specter of civil war, my friend. We cannot try to save pluralistic society by undermining it ourselves. We cannot let ourselves be manipulated into opposing, warring parties. We ought to remember, especially now, that we can never get to peace through war, conflict. That we can never get to understanding through rejection. That we can never get to tolerance through hatred. Ours is the task to remain mindful, to remain grounded, to do the work we have to do in order to preserve the ideals we seek to preserve and not destroy them in doing so. So this Shabbat, we let the tears of the shofar wake us up, that we might work together to eliminate fear, to eliminate ignorance, and to break the barriers of the illusion of separation. כן יהי רצון.